Hi, Lynn. How are you?
Hello, Fernanda. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So first of all, thank you for joining. I'm so glad we have you here today, especially because you have a fantastic story overall, not only in finance but also in education. So, could you start by telling us a little bit about like why you got into finance in the first place, and then how that led to where you are today?
Sure, Fernanda. Thank you for having me today. I studied finance and economics at the University of St. Gallen, Switzerland, and graduated with a master's degree. And I started my career in major Swiss banks. I did structured products and derivatives, and on the way earned my CFA charter. I then relocated to South Korea to work in the capital markets division of the then fourth largest local bank. And after the financial crisis hit, I moved to Hong Kong and ventured into technology at Bloomberg, building up the application specialist team in Asia. I moved back to Switzerland right before the COVID outbreak and went back into banking for a short while, but then discovered that I wanted to do something with a bigger purpose and invested in a startup company called Global Swiss Learning. It's a startup company in the education technology field, as you guys are as well, and I joined them to lead their operations. And yeah, I've also been a proud member of the CFA Institute's advisory group since 2019.
That's fantastic. That's so many things at once, but and since I think you have a very unique experience specifically with the CFA, and we'll talk a little bit about your background in a minute. But from my understanding, from my research, you were able to pass the CFA, all three levels of the CFA the first time. And then you've also been on the other side, like grading CFA exams, right? Okay, so first
That's
up,
right.
oh, go ahead.
No. It's ask a question. So,
Well, two basic questions, right? First, I'm pretty sure everybody wants to know what your secret is to passing all three levels the first time, because that's a little bit of a unicorn situation. And then, what's the best study strategy, or what would you maybe say? What's the best thing to focus on, since you were a grader? From that point of view, usually maybe what's the best thing that students can focus on when they're taking the test?
sure thing. Well, there is really not a big secret or anything about passing the exams. There is no secret. There is a lot of material to cover. I think what worked well for me was, one, to spot what is relevant to know, and two, what I would call cracking the exam code. Um, at the time, with the limited time I had at hand with a full-time job, it was crucial that I do not start reading the books from page one, from the beginning to the end. You would just simply not have enough time to do that, right? And at the time, there was also second to none multimedia learning solutions. All the edtech stuff that we have today just didn't exist. So I had to figure out an efficient way to maximize the intake of knowledge within a minimum amount of time. So I did what I call bottom-up learning. After getting an overview of the topics, I jumped straight into some sample exams first. Not trying to answer all the questions, but to get a feel of the exam style and just basically looking at the code of the exam. Passing exams has a lot to do with cracking that code. And if you know what to expect, you can adapt your studies to focus on the right topics. So, for example, I figured in level one, for instance, it was all about speed. It's all multiple choice. So you have 90 seconds to read and answer a question. Therefore, if you feel that you have no clue about the answer within the first 10 to 15 seconds, you have to move on to the next question and come back to it once you have answered all the other questions that you could easily tick off. So many candidates fail because they get stuck with one question and spend just too much time trying to figure it out, and then discover they are running out of time to answer the other questions, which they might have been able to answer much quicker.
Right.
Then for level two, which includes case studies, I didn't start by reading the case study from the beginning. I first read the questions as well. So I knew what to look for in the case study text and focus on these points. And that would also significantly help me to save time. And finally, level 3 was about being very concise in phrasing the answers to the essay questions. Having graded exams myself before, I know that graders would look for certain keywords and clues. So what I did was to list out the bullet points first, and only then start writing the essay around that structure.
Okay.
So yeah, really no big secret, just a little bit of technique.
No, thank you. No, but it is helpful to know that maybe the approach for all 3 levels, even though the studying, like the routine might be similar, what you have to focus on in every test is different, right? And that's specifically related from what I take away to the time that you have per question, right? So, okay, perfect. So thank you for that. And then in terms of the CFA certification as a whole, right? Not only do you have the certification, but you're also very involved in CFA society. So why do you think the CFA is worth it? Or is it?
Is it worth it? Yeah, it's absolutely worth it. And trust me, I'm not saying that because I'm speaking with you today. I think, why was it worth it? At the time when I earned my CFA charter, I was 4 years into my career, and it was a crucial point that decided over being promoted or staying below the glass ceiling. So I think what helped me really is that determination I showed at that time by working my some 60-hour weeks or something, and still being able to pass the CFA exams, caught the attention of some important company leaders. So I got chosen for an executive program, which gave me the chance to do further studies in the Anderson School at UCLA, California, to refine my general management skills. So that gave me a significant career boost that would set me on the path of climbing the ranks quickly. So I guess, yes, having a CFA charter is not only about the certification, but it's about, showing that you are determined and that you can work under pressure.
Definitely. I do think that's an important point. I feel like a common thread or a lot of that a lot of our CFAs share is that maybe the CFA certification as like a tangible thing, right, doesn't really change your life much unless you kind of combine it with work experience or with other skill sets. And then that's really what makes the CFA even more valuable in your CV. And then also in terms of like well, let's think about this, right? Is the certification kind of like a justification for work experience, or is it a complement for it?
That's a good question. My opinion is that I don't think that necessarily the certification alone was what got me ahead in my own career. But more the fact, as I said before, that I showed resilience and determination to go the extra mile and succeeded at it. Certification means nothing if the employers don't know the quality behind it. Yeah. And that is what the CFA Institute has done extremely well. Everyone knows what kind of effort it takes to earn the charter and how difficult it is. So if you earn this title, you've already proven a point that others still have to prove. And that gives you a significant advantage to advance in your career. But on the other hand, experience, you can't get around experience, right? Of course, if somebody has very good experience in the field and somebody has no experience in the field but the CFA charter, that doesn't mean that the person with the CFA charter would have an advantage. So it's a combination of both.
Right. It is kind of like a paradox though that I think the CFA does help, because at least for me, when I was graduating college, I don't know how it is in Switzerland, but in the US, you kind of like work while you're studying, or you're just studying, and then you graduate and you like enter into this job world, and you're just like, what do I do? Everything's different. So it's kind of like everybody needs a job, but to get a job, you need an experience, but to need experience, you need a job. So it's kind of like this vicious cycle that people don't seem to kind of get away from. But I did, on a personal level, did see a lot of my university peers that were studying for the CFA that really got their foot in the door for interviews when it came to that, especially straight out of college. So I do agree with you in the sense that the CFA itself does take a specific type of person to do successfully, right? So that in itself, just getting even the level 1 or the certification as a whole gives employers a very good idea of the type of person that you are in terms of how you handle work ethic and how you handle pressure, and whether or not you can essentially do what you're going to be doing, right? So I do think that's a very good point. Now, in terms of, apart from the certification itself, right, what's maybe the best thing that a student can do to get ahead in the financial industry, since you were so involved?
As much I love to say is the CFA charter, I think there's one much more significant factor, and I think that's focusing on people. Education and training builds the foundation of your hard skills. Your work experience shapes your soft skills, but what makes you a leader are your human skills. So I just came back yesterday from a 25-year anniversary party of the company my late father used to work for. And 25 years ago, the founders left a company that they hated because they treated people like replaceable machine parts. And they went on to start up their own company with the vision to be a company that people loved to work for. And 25 years on, they are a global firm with the lowest employee turnover rate in the industry. Yeah. I could feel how much everyone loved to work for this company. It was such a great vibe. So I really think it's human skills that makes you a great leader. And it's also what made that company overtake their competitor they left 25 years ago.
Wow. Speaking of humane leadership, I'm so glad you brought that up. Would you mind sharing with us the story that it has to do something with $100 bill and a cigarette?
I'd love to share that. I'm from a refugee background. My parents came to Switzerland with nothing in their hands but just $100 bill wrapped in cigarettes. I think that's that was the story you were talking about. But I think the story that I would like to tell you about humane leadership is when my mom arrived in Switzerland, and she only had that $100 bill in her pocket. But there was so many other refugees that she's been on the boat with, asking her, can you please tell my family back home that we made it out and we're alive and we're okay. And obviously, she really wanted to help, but she had very limited means with the $100 bill at the time. She wrote all the letters back to the families, and half of those $100 basically went into those letters. And back then, my mom was, she was hurting over losing half of the money that she had, but she still did it because she just thought it's the right thing to do. Just years later, there was a letter that came to my mom's mailbox, and it was one of her fellow refugees who also made it out. And in that letter, she said, I wanted to thank you. In all those years, I didn't have the chance to do that. But back then, when we got out and you wrote that letter back home to my mother, that was the last thing she read before she died. And it gave me so much comfort to know that somebody passed away in peace, knowing that we were fine, that we were alive. And so, what goes around comes around. I think that's really the story.
It's true, but it is a significant part of business, at least from my personal experience and from what you're saying. Really, how you treat people or how you decide to go about on the finance world, being so competitive, it is such a different side or such a different approach to it that I really do think is very, very valuable. So, but thank you. Also, I did very much stalk you on social media. Well, we call it research and due diligence.
I don't mind somebody like you stalking me, Fernanda.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But yes, we do have to do our research, right? Anyways, thank you so much for sharing. I really do like that. When I read that, it did blow my mind a little bit when it comes to that, because it was at a place of necessity, but I feel like it is a testament of like what you can do for other people as well. You don't really need much means to be a great leader. So I really do love that. Okay, let's segment back to the interview itself, please. My bad. So in terms of your personal career, right? Because you've had so many successful endeavors, and you've been able to do what I consider the impossible, which is essentially career shifting successfully after a lot of years in a lot of different areas. So what would you say is like your biggest contributor to your professional success?
My personal professional, oh, sorry, my best professional success, did you say?
No, like your biggest contributor. So like maybe a skill or something that you've learned, or maybe a person, anything that you can like you can look back and be like, because of this, I'm able to essentially do everything that I wanted to do career-wise. Not only in finance, but like as a whole.
Yeah, I think, coming from a refugee background, obviously it was very important to me to make sure that everyone gets equal opportunity to do what they dream of. And that's probably one of the reasons why I joined Global Swiss Learning in the first place, because that is what they stand for, right? Global Swiss Learning is offering equal opportunity through education. And that is very close to my heart because obviously in Switzerland, when we came here, my parents didn't have a lot of money and they couldn't afford a very expensive education for me. But Switzerland is one of the countries that offers very affordable education. And I was given the chance to study and to get to where I am today. And I'm just a very strong believer that everyone should get access to high quality education at an affordable rate so they can realize their professional dreams. Unfortunately, this isn't the case in many places. So I guess, just a couple of years ago, I just questioned a little bit what I was doing in my job in finance. I loved what I was doing, but at the same time, it just lacked a little bit of meaning and purpose. And I think but the greatest achievement for my professional career was to make that step away from a very well-paying job and starting something that is closer to my heart. And we're 1.5 years, 2 years into business now with Global Swiss Learning, and I just feel the successes that we're celebrating here just resonate so much more with me than the successes that we had back in the big finance company, which was also nice, but it just feels more fulfilling.
Wow, I got you. A quick question. This is not on the list, but was the CFA helpful in the job shifting, or was it you kind of like left the CFA behind when you moved on to education, or is it still useful today?
It's actually interesting you bring that up because I was in the beginning. When you found a company, you obviously have to think about, you have external investors, right? So you have to think about how do you convince investors to pay the valuation of your company that you're managing. And coming from a derivatives and structured products background, I had really no clue about company valuation. But the CFA helped me a lot with understanding what company valuation means in the first place. And obviously, I think it just gives you a lot of tools, the CFA charter, and the things you're learning there. And suddenly, you find something that proves extremely useful. And then accounting, for example. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I hate accounting in principle. But
I feel
if you start your own company, you've got to understand a little bit something about accounting, and that was also, that came in really handy. So I think it's actually quite funny you're mentioning that, and I'm just thinking, yeah, all these things that I tried to build up from scratch in the beginning. A lot of that came in really handy that I had a CFA charter. So yes, it was very useful
Oh,
to translate into a new kind of field. Yeah. So
that's really interesting, actually. I'm glad you mentioned that. So in terms of like the CFA as a whole, right? Because I don't know how you found about the CFA, like at what point in your career you did. You said like you were working while you were studying for the CFA, right? Right.
yeah, exactly.
That happens a lot. Like to me, I found out about the CFA when my friends were studying for the CFA, which was after college. But I really do think that if these concepts or just the idea of the certification was introduced on a university level, it would set the stage a lot differently for a lot of careers. Um, Simply because you know the value of the certification as a whole and just like what it does for you. But would you think that that's useful maybe to introduce it a little bit earlier than what it is currently being introduced?
Um, I'm just trying to remember why I got into the CFA at all, and I think it was actually through my husband, because he's in the asset management industry, and for him it was just a must to have a CFA charter. And back at the time he was like, oh, I have to go for the CFA exam, and I was like, oh, nice for you. And then I just knew he's going to be super grumpy if he has to study for a CFA exam, and I was just like, okay, so instead of you being grumpy to me, let's be grumpy together. And that's probably the reason why I took the CFA exam as well. So yeah, I also got it from the industry, to some in one way or another, and I haven't heard of it during university times for sure. I think I'm not sure if back then I really would have valued what it means to have a CFA charter. It was probably much too early. You see, I didn't have any work experience. I didn't know what it meant to work in the financial industry. And I didn't understand anything about the value of networking and all of these things. And perhaps, these are all things that should be in general more introduced to university curriculums, which are probably a little bit too academic, but they don't offer a lot of practical experience for students. And at least back in my times, I feel that wasn't the case. So yeah, no, to answer your question, I think absolutely, if you could introduce a little bit more about what it means once you are out in the big world, and you're working for a company, and you have to deliver. What does it mean to have extra certifications, or is it necessary? Does it help you at all? These kind of practical experiences I would have loved to know when I was a student back then.
Oh, me too. That's still the case too in in university. I feel like
Yeah,
it's finance especially is very different from what you learn to what you end up working in, right?
exactly. Yeah. That's
And
very
also
true.
in terms of like how segmented it is, I don't think I knew when I was in university how specific finance jobs are, or how like your skill set is really, really determined. Like if you're a risk manager, that's completely different from being a in asset management. But to me, they were both like the same, right? Oh yeah, risk and asset, but they're both management. So they're like, like so it's a little bit, it's not ignorant on the student's part, but it is very different when you go out. So I feel like having something to bridge that, at least for me, would have also been helpful. So I'm glad you mentioned that as well. But so moving on to you today, right? Because I feel like we've talked about your CFA background and your finance experience, but as of right now, you are currently Chief Operations Officer for Global Sys Learning, if I'm sorry, if I'm not mistaken. Right. So the same way that Wall Street Notes is passionate about like the equal opportunity through education, like you mentioned, I know Global Sys Learning is too. So would you mind sharing a little bit about what you guys do, or like what makes you excited about the future of education as of like 2022?
Yeah, absolutely. What excites me about the future of education is really the endless possibilities of technology now enables. Um, and as tough as COVID was for many of us, it made a positive impact in some areas. And one of those areas is digital education. Pre-COVID, many people, yeah, you're in the right industry. So, I think pre-COVID, many people were skeptical that digital learning could be as effective as classroom teaching. And this has changed dramatically in the last 2 years. And seeing that vast potential and opportunities in this field is also one of the reasons why I joined Global Swiss Learning. So, for instance, in China, where we just signed on our first clients, parents in the past, they were reluctant to let their children learn over the computer. That they couldn't even imagine that digital education would be as good as what their children learn in the classroom. But nowadays, it has just completely flipped. So everybody in China now is like, oh, digital education, that's the future. I want my kids to have a digital education because that's the new modern form of it. And that's what excites me. It's just within a very short period of time, just the whole mindset has completely changed. And that's really what inspires me a lot. And it also keeps me going every day, working for Global Swiss Learning, because I just think we can fulfill our vision in a world where digital learning is more and more accepted.
Thank you. Well, I don't say this just because I work for an e-learning company, right? But I do agree with that. I do resonate with that, simply because in terms of digital education as a whole, it does open a lot of doors for a lot of people that may or may not be able to go to like higher education based on different factors, right? But it really does kind of like level the field in a way, at least for me, to learn not only what you're good at, but also a variety of skills, and essentially make a more competent worker in the long run anyways for companies. So it is a very exciting space. It is also an incredibly competitive space, but offering, I think, good education is at the base, right? Useful, effective education will determine really who the leaders are in this industry.
The other thing is also, if you look at the industry side, many industries are feeling the pinch nowadays of finding qualified staff, especially in the vocational professions such as hospitality and healthcare, which we cover. And Switzerland is the #1 country for vocational education and apprenticeships. But so far, it was simply too expensive to bring it to other places in the world. But now, with the unlimited possibilities of digital learning, I have a vision of a world where everyone can realize their professional dreams. And with Global Swiss Learning, we can now bring high quality Swiss vocational education to the world in digitized format. It would have been unthinkable just a couple of years ago. And I think as much as everyone knows the quality behind the CFA charter, we want everyone to know the value of Global Swiss Learning's education. And I think we do not only want to offer world-class education, we want to build careers, and we want to make it accessible to everybody, no matter if it is the kid of a billionaire or a janitor. And that is what equal opportunity means for us. And that is what's inspiring me every day to build our mission.
That's a fantastic mission. It's also not an easy one, I can tell you that.
If it was easy, everyone would do it, right? So
but I'm really glad we have leaders really focusing on the digital aspect, because it is opening a lot of opportunities. Well, thank you so much, Lynn, not only for spending the time, but for giving us this extremely valuable insight on so many different areas. I really had a lot of fun. So thank you for spending the time to come here on Wall Street Notes today.
Thank you for having me, Fernanda. Much appreciate this opportunity to speak with you today. And also wish you and WSN the best of success in your endeavors.
Thank you. Bye.